Chapter 41 of Zhang Henshui is a family of golden fen. He pretends to be drunk in front of his face and uses clever tactics, while gossiping across the screen to reveal his love affair. Fengzhu also saw everyone's intention, so he said, "Aren't these 2 lines of poetry from the Peony Pavilion?" Then, Chen Juliang is the old man. Yang Banshan said, "That doesn't matter. Although we are not running out of food now, it is time to drink wine." Wang Xiang picked up the wine glass and handed it to Yang Banshan. "Drink. After you finish drinking, I will give you a toast." After her advice, I felt embarrassed not to drink, so I drank 2 glasses of wine in a row. Wang Xiang asked him to finish the drink before returning to the table. Yang Banshan slapped his fan on the edge of the table, sighed and said, "Brother Feng Jushi, this is your world." When we first arrived in Beijing, young Qingqiu was really a young man. He was like this all day long, doing that poetry and wine thing. You will be happier than you are now. Unexpectedly, in just a blink of an eye, you will become gray-haired and weak. When you encounter this kind of poetry and wine party, you will inevitably become a disgusting thing for young people. It's really sad. Fengzhu said, No matter who you are, you have a youth. For example, according to Ban Lao, he has been happy for half his life. Now that you are old, you have been happy with children like us for 2.5 lifetimes. Whether we are happy now will be as happy as the middle-aged people in the future. From this point of view, we are the only ones who are not as happy. Half-old people can't be inferior to us. Moreover, half-old people have very good spirits. If they don't have a beard, they look like they are only 30 or 40 years old. This is a gift of good spirits. Why not be happy? Yanxi said, "It's true. Yang Banshan really can't tell that he is in his 60s. Although Yang Banshan is an old man now, he is not afraid of being said to be poor, nor is he afraid of being said to be rich. Knowledge, it's just the same. He is afraid that people will say he is old. If you say he is old, he will definitely say, I am only 63 years old. A person who is 70 or 80 years old should not wear clothes and eat. So when people tell him in front of him that he is not old and that he is in good spirits, he is particularly happy." Now the Jin brothers said in unison that he was not old. They narrowed their eyes in love, and smiled with wrinkles on their faces. Fengzhu said, "What do you think after hearing what I said? Ask the people at the table if what I said is wrong." Liu Weiren said, "It's really true. The old man's spirit is certainly good, but his laughter makes him laugh. It's also very loud. If he wasn't an acquaintance and heard it from outside the house, he would never have guessed that it was the voice of a 60-year-old man." Yang Banshan said, "I believe this. It's not that. Brother Liu Shi and Feng Ming complimented me in person. I'm always invited to the club's Kunk Opera gatherings. If it comes to singing, I'm not afraid to compete with you guys." Liu Baoshan said with a smile, "Brother Yanxi is learning Kunk Opera now, and he can play the flute. Why don't you play a piece of music with him?" When he said this, he winked at Yanxi. Yanxi said, "I can sing a few verses. I have just learned the flute, and can only play siphon." Liu Baoshan was sitting with him. After hearing this, he tapped his feet under the table. A tap on his thigh. He smiled and said, "It's siphon. You can play it with Ban Lao." Yang Banshan said, "I don't want to sing. I'm afraid I can't do it today, and I don't have a flute." Fengzhu said, "That's ready-made. Who can? These 2 things, the flute, are indispensable." Wang Xiang said with a smile, "Is it the thick flute hanging in the room above?" After that, he took it away and went to the ground. Yang Banshan tilted his head and said with a smile, "Exquisite and petite, strong and graceful, all at the same time." Then he twirled a few long beards on his chin, nodded to Fengzhu, and said, "Brother, you are so beautiful." Feng held up the cup and sipped the wine with a smile. After a while, Wang Xiang took the flute and gave it to Yanxi. Yanxi held the flute in his hand and smiled at Yang Banshan. Half old, how about it?" Yang Banshan smiled and said, "This man with a beard wants me to sing siphon. You kids are not going to do it. Am I joking, old man?" Liu Baoshan waved his hands and said, No. Didn't you hear Yanxi say that he only knows this?" Yang Banshan said with a smile, "Brother Yanxi, please do it first. Give me a piece of music to listen to. If you play well, I will put on my old face and sing a part first." Yanxi also saw that everyone was happy and wanted to tease the old man, so he took the flute and played a part first. Then he rested his flute and smiled at Yang Banshan. What do you think? Can I just make do with it? Yang Banshan nodded and said, okay, let me try singing. Then he turned his body sideways and started singing. When you sing to your satisfaction, you can't help but follow suit. Wang Xiang and Feng Zhu were sitting together, holding Feng Zhu's hand and just smiling at him. Feng Zhu only pulled her clothes to prevent her from showing any trace. Yanxi couldn't help but laugh when she saw Yang Banshan twisting his waist and arranging his pale, bearded head. He played the flute loudly and softly, but he had no choice but to turn his face away and not look at the smiles of these people. After finally singing, everyone applauded. Yang Banshan twirled his beard and said, I am old, after all, and it is still difficult for me to sing. If it had been 10 years earlier, I would have sang 4 or 5 songs in a row and I wouldn't care. Everyone laughed again. Yang Banshan said, Brother Yanxi, when did you learn canopera? You are very good at it. Yanxi pointed at Liu Baoshan and said, our group of friends all learned it at the second master's house. There is a master who teaches canopera. I go to second master's place every day. We love to study, but the money is only 6 or 7 yuan a month, which is very limited. I didn't want to study, but they sent me to pay the tuition fee. It's all in vain, so I study it 2 or 3 days a week. What do you think? Can I learn it? Yang Banshan said, I can learn it. I know a little bit about it. We can study it. Zhu Yishi said, 7th brother doesn't need an old teacher. You have a new student, so you have to teach him some skills. This new student's skin recital is good, and canopera is the icing on the cake. Wang Xiang said, Mr. Zhu, don't add those words to me. I can't do anything. Yang Banshan smiled and said, New grandma, I understand what you said. You are afraid that we will ask you to sing a verse. In fact, I, a bearded person, can sing, honestly. What do you young people have to be ashamed of? Wang Xiang said with a smile, Old sir, you need to be able to sing. I don't know how to sing. Zhu Yishi said, Sister-in-law, are you not convinced? Wang Xiang pursed her lips and said with a smile, It doesn't matter. I can't sing anyway. Zhu Yishi said, Brother Feng Zhu, can you tell me if my new sister-in-law can sing? Feng Zhu said with a smile, That's a very strange thing to say. What? She doesn't know how to do it. If I say she can't sing. She can, but if I say she can't sing a song to prove it. At this point, Wang Xiang let out a low cry. Mother Liu, because he couldn't scream, he left by himself. After leaving, he didn't come back for a long time. Xiao Menjuan said, It's amazing, we all fell into the trap. They escaped from the banquet in front of us, and we had no idea how useless it was. Zhu Yishi said, It doesn't matter, he escaped. We can't escape from this house. Let's go back to her house after we've had enough food and drinks. Feng Zhu smiled and said, She is very honest and can't escape from the banquet. I just asked her to come. Then he ordered the servant to invite the eldest young lady to come. The footman smiled, but did not move. Feng Zhu said, Can't you invite me? I'll go. Then he walked inside, pulled Wang Xiang away, held her hand, and walked all the way to the living room. Wang Xiang smiled and said, Don't make trouble. I'm not a child who is afraid of guests. What are you trying to do? After saying that, she threw her hand down. Feng Zhu said, Sit down. If you sing so poorly, they won't ask you to sing. Just sit down and sit down. They are just kidding you if they want you to sing. Zhu Yishi said, Uncle is really good at talking. Such an understatement has wiped out the new grandma's debt. If it doesn't work, we have to ask the new grandma to give her a favor. Wang Xiang said with a smile, So I am afraid that you will make trouble, so I don't dare to invite you. I don't dare to invite you again this time. Liu Baoshan said with a smile, We've been here once, but we can't come again if we don't make a fuss. Come again. Let's just open up and make trouble. After saying this, everyone laughed. Feng Zhu didn't think anything of them making trouble like this, but Yanxi thought that Wang Xiang was always a sister-in-law. It would be embarrassing for everyone to joke with her sister-in-law in front of her uncle. Of course, I couldn't praise you, Xia, at this time, but Yanxi also felt that it was too rude for everyone to force Wan Shang to sing, so he sat silently, with a look of disapproval on his face. Wang Xiang and Yanxi were sitting diagonally across from each other. Seeing how embarrassed he was, he could tell part of the situation. Yin said to Feng Zhu, Master Qi is quite honest. Feng Zhu nodded. Zhu Yishi asked, Is he honest? Is he picked out from among honest people? Wang Xiang said, look, everyone is making trouble, and he is the only one who doesn't make trouble. Doesn't that count as honesty? Zhu Yishi said, because the new grandma is a eldest sister-in-law, he doesn't dare to talk nonsense in front of her. You see, he can say anything. Yanxi didn't argue after hearing this, just smiled. Yang Banshan said, female student, you don't have to sing. You can just have a drink with everyone. Wang Xiang couldn't be more naughty, so she held the wine flask and poured a round of wine at each seat. Then he returned to his seat, poured a glass, held up the glass to treat everyone, and said with a smile, the reception is very simple, please have a glass of light wine. After saying that, he touched his lips and drank it dry in one gulp, and took a photo of the cup to everyone. The cup shines on everyone and they always refuse to put it down. Because she was like this, everyone stopped drinking. They all picked up their glasses and drank a toast. Liu Baoshan said, it's disrespectful to come back without reciprocating, so we can't help but drink in return. So he passed the wine bottle to pour a glass, raised it, and said, new grandma, how are you? You don't want to be disrespectful, right? Wang Xiang, she smiled and said, I don't have enough drinking capacity. Let's all have another drink. After saying that, she picked it up and drank first. Yang Banshan smiled and said, this female disciple of mine is really smart. She is afraid that you guys will reply one by one and she won't be able to bear it, so she wants to say a toast first. It's really a good idea. At this point, the chrysanthemum pot has been served. The cook wiped the lamp and lit the fire wine on the front of the pot. The fire was blazing, spitting upwards, and a stream of hot air rushed toward the people's faces. After drinking the wine, Wan Sheng brought a bit of spring color to her face. Now that the fire is burning, her face is even redder. Wang Xiang took Fengzhu's hand and stroked his face for a while, then smiled and said, you touch it, am I not very drunk? Fengzhu smiled and said, you are so worthless. Drink these 2 glasses of wine. Why are you drunk? Wang Xiang folded her white hands on the edge of the table and rested her forehead on the back of her hands, saying, hey, my head is a little dizzy. What should I do? Are you tired of eating? It can't be dizziness. Wang Xiang flashed an arm and said, I'm dizzy because I'm tired of eating. I've never heard of you. Fengzhu said, you're really dizzy. Just go in and sleep. Don't eat. He took her arm and let her go. Wang Xiang supported someone with one hand and pressed the table with the other. She smiled at everyone and said, isn't this just skipping the table? Everyone was embarrassed and couldn't say anything. Looking at her like that, she might be really dizzy, so she wouldn't be embarrassed. Fengzhu took her arm and turned around through the glass door. Wang Xiang waved her hand, turned around, smiled, and said softly, fool, who wants you to hold your arm? She turned around, jumped and ran away, and went back to the upper room. Fengzhu took a look and realized that she was causing trouble. This ghost was so good at mischief that he didn't even know it. Suddenly he started to laugh. He paused outside the house, suppressed his laughter, and then walked into the house. Zhu Yishi said, you can't get drunk after drinking wine. I'm afraid of the cold. Today, the weather is too cold. I see that she is still wearing a jacket. With her thin body, I can't stand it for her. Liu Baoshan said, nowadays, the ladies' love for beauty is really too much. In winter, they don't even want to wear leather clothes. They only wear a camel hair jacket, which is really pitiful. It's so cold today, but the new sister-in-law seems to be wearing it. It's a soft G jacket. Liu Weiren laughed and said, you've misjudged me. It's not a jacket, but a single coat. Zhu Yishi said, should I wear a single coat? I don't believe it. Fengzhu smiled and said, it's a single coat, but there is another small coat made of fine wool, so it's not cold. Yang Banshan smiled and said, they are really thoughtful. She looks good in a singlet, and she also wears a woolen jacket under the singlet. This way, she looks good and is not cold, which is really good. Fengzhu couldn't help but smile inwardly when he saw people praising his wife Ru. The cup is just in trance. Liu Baoshan held the bowl in his hand, banged his chopsticks on the rim of the bowl, and said, uncle, do you want to eat or not? We have finished eating. Fengzhu then woke up and drank half a bowl of porridge. As soon as everyone dispersed, they rushed to the upper room like a gust of wind. Wang Xiang knew that they were noisy and pretended to be asleep in the back room. Because Wang Xiang had a blush on her face, everyone thought she was really uncomfortable, so they didn't invite her out. They talked for a while, and then dispersed. Only Yanxi and Yang Banshan remained. Wang Xiang changed into a dark green velvet jacket, opened the door curtain, and came out with a smile. Yang Banshan smiled and said, "Good boy, you are really good at making enemies. Now I know your methods." Wang Xiang said with a smile, "How did you know that the uncle's friends are all troublemakers? Ignore them, but it offends people. They always make trouble with you, and you have no way to deal with it, so I have to pretend that my head hurts and avoid them. They can't have one or two of them every day. I'm not afraid. I can handle it." Feng Zhu smiled and said, "I was just bragging about hiding." When Wang Xiang spoke, she poured a cup of tea for Yang Banshan and Yanxi and sat together on a sofa. Wang Xiang first smiled at Yanxi and said, "Master Qi, don't say that when you go back to the house. I originally wanted to live outside, but it's not a rule. Once the uncle clears things up in front of my wife, I will go back. At this time, you can come and play, but don't say a word about going back. It doesn't matter to me. If something happens, just stay away without saying anything, but it's troublesome enough for me." Yang Banshan nodded repeatedly. "That makes sense. Old 7. You have to keep the secret. It will be bad for everyone if there is a stir." Yanxi smiled and said, "It was Zhao Menjiwan who forced me to come here today. Otherwise, I wouldn't know where to live. Where is it? My temperament is to not care about my own business." Wang Xiang said with a smile, "I'm not saying that Mr. Qi is nosy. I'm just afraid that if you are happy, you will tell me where I had dinner tonight. When your elder sister-in-law hears this, what should you do? Or should you say yes or not? If you don't tell me, I'm sorry to my elder sister-in-law, but if you say it, I'm sorry to my elder brother." Yanxi guessed it after seeing her few words. After realizing what was on his mind, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. Wang Xiang smiled and said, "What I said is quite right, isn't it?" Yanxi smiled and said, "I just said that I am the kind of person who doesn't mind other people's business. No matter what happens, I won't say the sides of the story." Wang Xiang smiled and said, "That's great. I'm bored. Not going out now. If you have nothing to do, 7th Master can come and talk to me often. It would be better if there is one more person together, so we can play cards at home." Feng Zhu smiled and said, "You are thoughtful. You ask someone to play cards with you all day long. Others will be like you and have no problems, right?" Wang Xiang said, "I'm not asking you to play cards with me all day long, but just come when you have nothing to do. Didn't you hear me clearly? 7th Master, you'd better come alone, and don't invite anyone to play cards. I just said one thing, and your eldest brother doesn't want to. If a fight really breaks out, your brother will have to beat someone up." As she spoke, she supported the armrests of the sofa chair with her arms and sat on it, bouncing up and down. The heels of her high-soled leather shoes hit the floor up and down, making a thumping sound. Yanxi saw that she was innocent and naive, and had no brothel habits. If he told Pei Fang and asked her to come and question him, he would not be able to justify it. Therefore, he overturned Pei Fang's words. It was better to follow his elder brother and keep it a secret. In this way, the conversation continued casually. They talked until 1 o'clock, and then took Feng Zhu's car to go home. When they got home, they sat for a while and it was almost 3 o'clock. When he woke up, it was afternoon again. Because Mrs. Jin had told Jin Rong earlier that the 7th Master had woken up and asked him to go and talk. So when Yanxi got up, Jin Rong said, "7th Master, you came back too late these days. The Prime Minister wants you to go and talk." Yanxi said, "Is it true? You are talking nonsense again." Jin Rong said, "Why is it nonsense? The wife sent people to ask several times whether you got up." Yanxi was shocked. Could it be that he had done something wrong last night? He would not know what kind of nail he would encounter when he saw his father. Yin asked, "Did the madam ask me about my coming? How did you tell the madam?" Jin Rong said, "I didn't tell the madam. The madam sent someone to ask." Yanxi asked, "Is the Prime Minister home?" Jin Rong said, "He hasn't come back from the government office yet." Yanxi smiled and said, "That's lucky for me. Let me go in and try first. It doesn't matter if the madam scolds me." So he washed his face and hurried to the upper room. When he arrived at the moon gate in the inner courtyard, he put his hands behind his back and walked slowly along the corridor, singing Erhuang. Mrs. Jin was wearing a pair of reading glasses and holding a large print Romance of the Three Kingdoms and reading it in the light under the window. Seeing the shadows of people swaying outside the window and hearing Yanxi's humming, she asked, "Isn't that old Seven outside?" Yanxi said, "It's me. I want to ask fourth sister a few foreign words." Mrs. Jin said, "Don't be so hypocritical. Get in here. I have something to ask you." Yanxi smiled, opened the curtain with one hand, and stood against the door frame with one foot inside the door and one foot outside the door. Mrs. Jin took off her glasses and asked, "Let me ask you, what have you been busy with all this time? I haven't seen you for 3 or 4 days. If you are so busy, you should catch up with your father. Why can't you make a living?" Yanxi smiled and said, "You really scold me. But I don't read in the study every day, and you say I can't sit still and don't look like an adult. I sit in the study all day long, and you say I can't see anyone. Isn't this too difficult?" Mrs. Jin pointed at Yanxi with her index finger and smiled. "Child, you lie to me like this. If your father were here, would you say that?" Yanxi smiled and said, "I'm not lying. I really do read for several hours every day." Mrs. Jin said, "You can't cover up your lie now. Just now you said you didn't go out all day, but now you change it to a few hours. Last night, at 1 o'clock, I sent someone to call you. You haven't come back yet. Where have you been?" Yanxi said, "I'm at Master Liu's house." Mrs. Jin said, "You're talking nonsense. I asked someone to call the Liu family and I heard that Master Liu himself was not at home." Yanxi had walked into the house and was lying on a sofa. He said softly, "It's really a coincidence that I ran into my father-in-law. I played 4 rounds of cards yesterday, and you came to me." Mrs. Jin said, "Don't make excuses that you were playing cards. Even if you were playing cards, you shouldn't have done that. Your father is very angry about you. You are still so frivolous, and don't know it at all." Yanxi said, "I didn't do anything wrong. Why is my father angry? It's not a big deal to come back a little late, and I'm not the only one who came back late." Mrs. Jin said, "I won't say anything to you. You are right. Let your father come back and then talk to him. Many people say that you are unreasonable. I don't do that. I'm in the brothel every night." Yanxi jumped up and said, "How can that be true? Who said that? I'll invite the person who reported this to come and confront him face to face." Mrs. Jin said, "That's not quite right. You're jumping like that. It shows that you don't say anything when people say you're away all day. That's the truth." Just as she was talking here, the maid came in and said, "Director Wei's old lady called and asked Madam to come over to play cards." Mrs. Jin said, "Go and answer her call, and tell her I'll be back in a while." The maid left, and Yanxi looked at his mother, smiled, but said nothing. Mrs. Jin laughed and said, "You useless thing, you are talking about me in your heart. You think I scolded you for playing cards, but I played cards myself. You should know that I was socializing." Yanxi said, "You are really asking too much. Even if I didn't say anything, I was guilty. If you say that I am committing a crime in my heart, then you can sue me for disobedience at any time." Mrs. Jin threw her hand and said, "Go out. Don't talk nonsense here. I don't have time to talk to you about these gossips." Yanxi stuck out his tongue and took this opportunity to escape. As soon as he went out, he ran into Miley. She grabbed Yanxi's chest and said with a smile, "You've caught me." Yanxi said, "You reckless guy. You scared me. What are you catching me for?" Miley said, "Sister Wang Zhaoxi's birthday is tomorrow. I bought something for her. Please write me a note." Yanxi said, "Children don't need to give gifts on their birthdays. If you need to give gifts, you still need to make a gift list. It's even more embarrassing for children to act like adults." Miley said, "It's embarrassing or not, don't worry about it. Just write it down for me." After saying that, she dragged Yanxi's hand and left. Miley had used 2 brocade screens in the second concubine's suite to make a small study room because she had to review her homework. So she took Yanxi and went straight to the suite. The second concubine saw Yanxi being pulled in, and said with a smile, "Miley, you are not afraid of the 7th brother, and you always make trouble with him. The 7th brother should also show some gifts and control her." Yanxi smiled. Miley turned her head and said, "Don't mind. It's not your business." The second concubine said, "This girl is so powerful. I can't control you. I can beat you." As she said that, she took the peacock tail in the porcelain vase and chased after her. Miley smiled and slammed the door of the suite. Yanxi smiled and said, "The beating is fake, and the hiding is also fake. I haven't seen anyone hit with that light thing. Miley, your skin and flesh must be made of tofu. Are you afraid that the peacock tail will hurt you? You are really useless. Miley smiled and said, if someone wants to be beaten, they can't hide, and you are trying to cause trouble. This is even worse. The second concubine smiled and said, I just did it casually. I didn't have anything to beat people. Do you think I really want to scare you? Yanxi said, come on, second concubine, just forgive her this time. Anyway, it doesn't hurt, and she is not afraid. The second concubine saw Yanxi blocking her, so she let it go. In the inner room, Miley went to find Yanxi to write. Paifeng followed Miley as she was carrying Yanxi into the house. Standing outside the door, she found it funny to see the second concubine managing Miley like that. After the second concubine hit someone, she came in with a smile and said, the second concubine loves my sister less than mother does. Mother doesn't even scold her. The second concubine said, that's because of the relationship between us. Madam is more polite to the child. In fact, if she hits or scolds the child, would we dare to say that she is unfair? Paifeng said, in fact, it's not politeness. In fact, the little sister is a little funny. No wonder the old lady loves her. Even I can't bear to glare at her. When she said this, she heard Miley say, seventh brother, aren't you afraid of what the eldest sister-in-law will say? Paifeng thought that Miley heard the conversation and joined in. So she tilted her head and listened. Yanxi said, my attitude is fair. I will not offend the new or the old. Miley said, you should make the elder sister-in-law angry. She has been in our family for many years and is very good to you. You only met this new sister-in-law yesterday. Don't you have any respect for her? Yanxi said, don't shout. If someone hears it and spreads it to the elder sister-in-law, I will be a trouble again. The second concubine didn't pay attention at first, but when she saw Paifeng kept silent and listened quietly, her heart couldn't help but beat wildly. This pair of children talked without restraint. The second concubine wanted to stop them, but she was afraid that Paifeng would be unhappy. If she didn't stop them, if she told the whole story, there would be a big quarrel, which would be even more disastrous. As an outsider, she was so anxious that her face turned red and white. She had to raise her voice and called Wang Ma repeatedly. Miley didn't care. She continued to talk. She asked Yanxi, what do you think of this new sister-in-law? Is she pretty? Yanxi said, of course she is pretty. If she is not pretty, do you think the old lady will say that? Miley said, what will you call her when she sees you? The second concubine heard this from the next room, and was sweating all over. She said to Paifeng, Madam, this is actually true. I think our eldest brother is a little crazy. Let's call the seventh brother and interrogate him face to face. Then she slapped the table and shouted, seventh brother, don't say it over there. The eldest sister-in-law is here. Come here and talk. Yanxi was suddenly shocked when he heard this. He hurriedly walked out of the door of the suite and stretched his head to look over here. Isn't Paifeng sitting here? Yanxi's face flushed, and he asked, when did the eldest sister-in-law come? Paifeng smiled. You don't know I'm here, do you? If the second concubine kept silent, you would probably have to continue reciting the three-character classic. Yanxi smiled. I told my eighth sister that I would invite you here and ask you for a condition, and then tell you the condition. Unexpectedly, you came first, and you got the advantage. Paifeng pointed at Yanxi's face and sneered, my good man, no matter how I asked you, you denied it completely and said you knew nothing. But in the evening of the same day, you went to see the new sister-in-law. It's your freedom to go or not. How can you tell my eighth sister that you dare not offend the new one? It's better for my eighth sister to have a conscience, and say that you let me down. Yanxi's face became even redder after being ridiculed by Paifeng, as if he was drunk. She could only smile foolishly, and said, Sister-in-law, I am sorry for what I did. But can you let me explain it? Paifeng said, no need to explain. I know that you had no choice. Yanxi smiled and said, I really can't say anything more. Well, I will avoid you, and we can talk later. As she said that, she turned around and wanted to leave. Paifeng stretched out her hand and smiled. No, you want to play the trick of escaping in front of me again. Yanxi said, this is difficult. I am here, and you don't allow me to say it. I want to leave, and you think I didn't say it. What should I do? Paifeng said, if you scold me, you have to scold you, and if you scold you, you have to say it. Yanxi smiled at the second concubine, frowned, raised his hands, and said, "Look at my bones." The second concubine also smiled. Paifeng sat on a soft couch with sea sponge, stepped on a swivel chair at the head of the couch, and said with a smile, "Sit here, I have something to ask you." Yanxi smiled and said, "So you want to interrogate me, okay? Who told me to be a suspect? I'll sit down and you can interrogate me." Paifeng said, "I'm talking to you properly, not joking." Yanxi deliberately propped up the swivel chair properly, then sat down, facing Paifeng, and said, "Sister-in-law, please ask me. I will answer one by one, and if I don't know, I will say I don't know." Paifeng said, "What I ask are all things you can know. I won't ask more, just 10 questions. But you have to answer these 10 questions truthfully, and don't lie. If you lie, I will punish you twice, and ask 20 questions." Yanxi thought, what's the difficulty in 10 questions? It's just a casual, perfunctory answer. Yin said, "Well, what about the first question?" As he said this, he raised his index finger. Paifeng said, "I asked you, you must tell me. The first question I asked you is where does she live?" Yanxi didn't expect that the first question was such a practical question. So he said, "She lives in East City." Paifeng said, "You said that, which is the same as not saying anything. East City is a big place. How can I know where she lives? You promised me 10 questions and you won't lie. Now, you lied in the first sentence." Yanxi smiled on his face, but he was embarrassed in his heart. If he didn't tell her, he couldn't complete the answer, which was obviously a lie. If he told her, she could just follow the clues. This made Yanxi really anxious and helpless. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.